Morning, everybody. Happy St Andrew's Day as well.
Oh, really?
I feel like I should have some bagpipes in the background.
That's where we should all have hot toddies to warm ourselves up then.
That's
surely,
true.
Sharon. Why were they not sent round?
Why were they not sent round? You should have done that. Next time we do the morning call, we'll be prepared. It's a really good shout. Just wait for everyone to pile in.
Morning,
Hope everyone's
Danny.
well today.
Danger.
Hi, Suzanne. Hi, Anthony.
Hi there.
Well, it's nice to see people on camera. Hi, Catherine.
Hello, Lady Lloyd Barnes.
Some
And
weeks people
Duchess
don't come on
Bina.
camera.
Oh, and Suzanne's here. It's like a Wednesday party. And Phoebes. God, the girl gang's back together. It's like Destiny's Child reforming.
I know we've got about 50 people signed up to this, but I think we'll crack on and let people dive in. Maybe I'll give it 30 seconds. I wonder if the lack of light in the morning affects people coming in early or not. Well, we shall start. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Action 9 in the All-In how-to sessions for our action plan. I'm absolutely thrilled today. It's Action 9 is a sort of part 2, if you like, for disability, because the first one, as you know, when we launched it last summer, was the kind of virtual front door and improving accessibility online across our websites for people with different levels of need. And today we're looking at physical disability, so it's the actual front door of our businesses. We've got, as usual, a stellar panel of people with a lived experience who are doing this work as well in their businesses every day. So I'll introduce them in a moment, but as ever, I'm going to go straight to Dan from Krados, who's going to give us the top line on the data that we've got from the All-In census last year.
Yeah, thanks, Sharon. Good morning, everyone. I've just got a few slides, so I'm going to share my screen with you all to run through some of the key findings related to this issue. Can everyone see that?
Yeah.
Excellent. Okay, so as ever, just a recap of All-In itself. So we conducted it in March 2021 and received 16,000 responses, which is definitely the largest survey response ever recorded for our industry. But I'm pretty sure it's the largest diversity and inclusion survey of any industry across the UK. And we did some calculations and estimated that commitment to filling it in was an investment of over £500,000 of industry's time. So again, just a real kind of reflection of the engagement and how it was prioritised across industry. And we will be repeating the survey in March next year. So hopefully we'll improve on that response and get even more engagement and commitment. So in the survey in 2021, we used the Equality Act 2002 definition of disability. So a physical or mental impairment, a substantial or long-term adverse effect on an individual's ability to carry out normal day-to-day activities. So that was the definition that we used for disabled in the survey. I think in 2023, we will look to modify the way we've asked this question a bit to kind of make it more about identity and how people identify. But we kind of went with this as it's kind of benchmarks against what the Office of National Statistics do. And based on this definition, we found that disabled people in the industry were underrepresented compared to the UK average, and more than likely than average to have negative experiences and encounter discrimination while working in advertising and marketing. So representation first. So overall, 9% of the advertising and marketing workforce were disabled. 2% were physically disabled, which is significantly lower than the UK working average, which is 7%. So quite a way under the UK average there. So definitely more that can be done in terms of recruitment and increase in representation. And these were the health conditions that were reported by those people with physical disabilities, with the most common at the top going through to the least common. So essentially 40% of those people with physical disabilities were suffering from stress or anxiety, followed by mobility impairments was the most common physical disability reported, and you can see the rest there. See, mental health was also the fourth most common issue for people with physical disabilities, so very prevalent there, 32%. Now, so when we look at other demographics, the kind of the demographic breakdown of those people with physical disabilities was essentially the same as the wider all-in census, which is quite unusual for kind of the other diversity characteristics that we've looked at. So got on the left-hand chart there, we've got levels of seniority, and there's a real spread there across the industry. And 10% of the people with physical disabilities were in kind of C-suite, which is exactly the same proportion as the industry at large. So a real spread there across levels of the industry, which is good to see, and suggest that the same with the age there on the right-hand side, a real good spread of ages, which is almost identical to the breakdown of the wider all-in sample and the wider industry. And it was the same for gender, ethnicity. There wasn't really any kind of specific demographics where physically disabled people seem to be concentrated. Physically disabled people were not just underrepresented in the industry. Many also experienced barriers to progression and also demeaning behaviours. First of all, we're going to look a little bit at awareness. So the pie chart on the left there shows that 71% of people with a physical disability, their company was aware of their health condition. And moving over to the right, of those people that their company was aware of their condition, 71% said that their company was generally supportive. So, that's on the surface looked quite positive, although there's obviously still a big chunk there that said their company either wasn't supportive or wasn't, was kind of neutral. But when we look at the third pie chart there, could your company do more? You can see that 45%, the majority, believe that their company could do more to support their physical disability, with a 17%, just 17% thinking that their company actually exceeds expectation. So clear room for improvement there. So the experience of physically disabled people in terms of their experience in the workplace was notably more negative than the industry average across most of the measures that we actually had in the survey. And here's just a few examples I've pulled out. So whether the individual feels that they belong at their company, much lower proportion say agreeing to that statement amongst those identifying as physically disabled, 59% versus 70%. Whether they feel left out at work, 40% of the physically disabled people agreed that they did feel like that, compared to 22% across the average, and consistently feel anxious in their job. Again, 43% of physically disabled people said that was the case, which again is much higher than the all-in average at 29%. So some really worrying trends there. And as I say, those three are just an example, and most of the kind of measures that we had in the survey were more negative for this group. Physically disabled people were also around twice as likely than average to experience demeaning behaviours. And this is not over their career, this is in the past 12 months at their current company. So it's very, very recent, it's not historical. So 22% of physically disabled people had been bullied or undermined in the last 12 months. And again, that's double almost double the all-in average at 12%. 39% had been unfairly spoken over in meetings, which again was higher than the all-in average, and around a quarter had been made to feel uncomfortable in the workplace in the last 12 months. And again, those are just 3 examples of the kind of demeaning behaviour as that we measured, and all of them were more negative. So obviously some really, kind of shocking statistics there that lead to around a quarter, again, 24% of physically disabled people said they were likely to leave their company due to a lack of inclusion or discrimination. So, potential, real potential retention issues here for people with physical disabilities. And that is the summary there. Thank you very much. And if anyone's got any questions about any of that, I'm more than happy to contact me afterwards and I'll follow up in more detail.
Thanks so much, Dan. Yeah, I think Julia had a comment just to say, we'll definitely, thanks for that, Julia. We'll definitely share the data with everyone on the call today. Yeah, they are very sort of powerful stats, and they do set the context for our conversation today. So thanks, Dan. As I say, I've got, again, an incredible panel today. Got Sam Tatlow, MBE, who is Creative Diversity Partner for ITV. I'm delighted to welcome as well Giles Barker, who's Workplace Disability Lead for For Inclusion. Danny Josephs, who's Client Partner at MFuse, and also Chair of our All-In Disability Working Group, which is one of the satellite groups that developed this action. And best wishes sent to Kelly Knight from AMV BBDO, who was going to be joining us today, but she's not very well, so sending her best wishes from all of us. So Danny, if I could come to you first, and just if you're happy to do so, just could you help us understand, from your perspective, what life has been like? 'Cause I know this is a relatively new way of life for you. It'd be great to better understand that.
Sure, I'll do my best. Hello, everyone. So I have a neurological condition called multiple sclerosis, which is typically a progressive condition. I've had it now for, well, officially almost 30 years. And many people become disabled, many people end up in wheelchairs, but it's quite an abstract concept until it happens to you. So for 20 odd years, and there's people on this call who I knew when I was totally able, so might be surprised to see me like this. But, so for many years I was fully able, then I used a walking stick. And then, excuse me, I suppose over the lockdown COVID period, I became properly disabled. So I now can't leave my house without a Zimmer frame, a walking frame, a wheelchair, or a scooter. And actually, we're in the process of adapting our house. So I've gone from experiencing the world like most people to experiencing the world like a disabled person. And as a disabled person, you realize the world is not set up for people with mobility impairments. It's really not at all. So everywhere I go now, I need to call, can I get in? Is it step-free access? And as importantly, is there a disabled accessible toilet where I'm going? Because otherwise, when you can't walk quickly, you need a toilet. It's really tricky if there isn't one that's easy to find. So I'm on a mission to change the world because it's not acceptable. And the thing, you don't know what you don't know. I sympathize a bit with companies. The 71% do help people. If you don't know, you just don't know. So, I've been disabled in disabled toilets, which clearly aren't disabled because the door's too heavy or there's no grab rails. They're bigger than a normal toilet, but until you tell people, they just don't know. So, I sympathize with companies. Equally, it's not acceptable. So I'm on a mission to change that, which is why I'm really proud to be in this group and chair our mission to change the world, I suppose.
Danny, that's great. Thank you so much. And obviously we'll open up the conversation a bit in terms of, I'd love you all to sort of share different examples of how that's impacting you, but I think that's really helpful insight. Sam, if I can move on to you in terms of your role at ITV, and congratulations on your MBE, by the way, this year, which is awarded for services to people with disabilities. What are you doing at ITV? Sort of why and how are you sort of having this focus on a culture, particularly around inclusion of people with disability?
Absolutely, yes. So, hi everyone. I'm one of the creative diversity partners at ITV. So, we're in the inclusion team and work with teams across the business to embed our diversity and inclusion objectives, but also embed the work that we're trying to do in each of the departments. So, over the last particularly kind of 18 months, we've been embedding our work around disability inclusion and accessibility because we recognised that we had a lot of work that needed to be accelerated. So it's very much part of our diversity acceleration plan, and everything that we submitted as part of our all-in submission is work that's happening across the business, particularly within and including within our commercial team. So for us, it's about our culture, and it's about embedding that culture for individuals so that they know how it is relevant to them as an individual, no matter what part of the business they're in. And we recognise quite early that actually people feel quite uncomfortable talking about disability, particularly if this is not something that impacts you on a day-to-day basis personally, or you've interacted with disabled people before. What is quite interesting to reflect on, and particularly from what Danny just said, is that one in five people, so 20% of the population, are recognized as having a disability, whether that is physical, visible, or non-visible. So whether people feel like they interact with disability or not, they just don't know about it. So we've rolled out some disability inclusion training across the business to start raising the confidence levels of everyone to talk about disability and learn about disability, but also start having those uncomfortable conversations so that people start feeling more confident talking about it. So that's been one way that we have started to embed the culture around disability and raising the bar. And then we are also part of lots of different kind of conversations that happen across the industry, which I think we'll talk a bit in more detail about later on, around embedding accessibility, particularly in production, so that we can start raising the bar around that inclusion. Because as Danny just said, the world is built for a particular set of people and what people think is possible and for an individual to do. That actually is not standard. If you think about everybody and what people need and are able to do, actually, whether you're disabled or not, the world is not built for everyone. So we need to start breaking down those barriers and start rethinking about how we run the workplace, how we set up the office spaces, how we think about kind of the day-to-day life. So there's lots of work happening in that space too.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Sam. And Giles, I know with Channel 4, in your sort of office refurbishment, you've been sort of conducting an inclusive design assessment, essentially. Could you tell us a bit more about that, what that entails, and what the findings were as well? What's resulted from that assessment?
Yes, good morning, everybody. It's Giles Barker. I'm a workplace disability lead for Channel 4. We've been refurbishing our London offices at Horseferry Road. And actually, one of the things that came up in some previous feedback from staff was around the meeting rooms, and especially around the introduction of hybrid meetings, where we've kind of come back from lockdown, and we wanted to have effective and efficient hybrid meetings. But we found that actually the subtitling on the team service wasn't picking up the sound. So we've actually introduced, as part of the kind of inclusive design for the refurbishment, we introduced an acoustic engineer who came in and tested the current environments and then suggested ways to improve the environment for the refurbishment. So that included soundproofing in the walls, soundproofing in the ceilings, acoustic curtains, and actually also kind of carpets on the floor. And they sound sometimes quite simple stuff, but actually testing the sounds, it sounds much more like a professional kind of environment. If you go down to Broadcast Centre, in terms of the continuity announcements, when you talk, there's no echo in the room, and so the quality of the subtitles is kind of 80-90% rather than kind of 60 or 50%. So the hybrid meeting environment is much more accessible. And actually, through that inclusive environment, we're looking at both the physical environment, the digital environment, and the interaction in between to make sure that they all work seamlessly together.
That's really helpful, Giles. And then coming back to you, Danny, because I know obviously in our conversations and coming to visit you in your office, that's been something that you've lived through in terms of the adaptations made to your workplace.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a bit about, the challenges around that, maybe the investment around that?
I think the stat that Dan presented, about 71% of people feeling their employers want to help. I'm surprised there's not more, because in my experience, you tell people about where you need help and they really want to help. So, and in my case, actually, it's easier being at work than it is at home at the moment, because directly behind me is an accessible toilet, and it's all on one floor, and that makes so much difference. It's nice, smooth, flat floors, which again, until you don't know. So there was a bit of investment, but actually, there's never been any debate about it. So in my experiences, people, when they know, they really want to help. But I was telling the guys before we started, last week I had in the space of a day, I had a really classic experience. So I went to Edinburgh from London on new business, and the passenger assistance on the train is amazing. They put you on the train, they put the ramp down for the scooter. So I got back to London about 10:30 at night, tired and want to go home. I went to the taxi rank, and you maneuver around this stupid little thing at King's Cross. You get to the front of the queue. The first guy was one of those like minivan cabs, which for me is not good, because I can drive on, but I can't get off the chair onto the seat and from the seat back onto the scooter, because there's not enough headroom. So I'll get the next cab. The guy grumpily said, okay. The next guy said, oh, I can't use my ramp, which is just not acceptable. The next guy got out of his cab and shouted at me for blocking the queue. I said, I'm not blocking the queue. I'm disabled. I just want to drive into a cab. He said, I'll pick you up. I'll put you in a cab. I said, I don't want that. I want to drive into a cab. So, there's a lot of swearing and shouting, but that's typical. I think that some people are really helpful, the train companies, some people are just appalling. And I think that's more about personal character than the companies. So back to your question, Sharon. Yeah, my workplace has been adapted for my benefit. And it makes a massive difference to my, it means I can go to work. It means there's a toilet on my floor. Otherwise, I work from home. Although equally, I think the pandemic has helped disabled people, because people realize you can work from home. You don't have to be in an office to work effectively and efficiently. So, although I can't work after this, I'm going straight to work. I'd rather be at work than be at home. It's makes a change. You've got to get out.
Well, I think you raised a really good point as well. It sort of comes up in most of our calls that we have on All In, is around sort of allyship as well, and what everybody can do, what everyone's responsibility is, I guess, in terms of if you witness something where you could possibly help and have a voice around. So I think in that taxi queue, for example, it would have been helpful if someone had sort of championed your, what your needs were at the time.
There was only one person that was late at night, which was a shame, because I like people to have seen it.
Yeah.
And he looked really awkward and embarrassed.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's such a challenge, isn't it? But I think that was an opportunity to sort of step in and say, help you.
Yeah.
Sharon, can I just pick up on that point, actually?
Please do, yeah.
Because I think it's really interesting. We've also just moved offices, or in the process of moving everyone from various different London-based offices into one office. And what has been really well, we have a similar culture, as Danny just explained, around being a business that if there is something that an individual needs, of course the business will adapt, make those changes, listen, and do what is needed for that individual. And as part of our office move, we really worked closely with our ABLE network, which is our disability colleague network, and they fed into the plans. They came and individuals from the group kind of came and toured the building and made recommendations. And the workplace services team here really do listen to them, and that's brilliant. And when an individual needs something, those changes will be put in place, whether that's a chair or a different kind of desk. That's all excellent, and I would really encourage everybody on this call that if you have either a disability network group in your business, to engage with them and start kind of getting them to feed into plans, or if you don't have a group but you do have disabled colleagues, then kind of chatting to them to find out what their experiences are so that they can feed into those plans. That's a brilliant first step. But actually where we're trying to get to and what our next step of work is about kind of universal design and thinking about accessibility and inclusion before somebody needs to request it. Because if you are a disabled person who is looking for a job, you are not going to apply to that business if you already know that it's inaccessible to you. So if that business doesn't make themselves accessible before you enter it, you're never going to attract those people, because it's not going to be accessible to them. So almost creating a set of standards of accessibility beforehand, so that we're promoting this culture of inclusion rather than only when somebody requests it, is kind of the next phase of it. But recognizing that we're all on a journey and all of this can kind of need to start somewhere is important too.
Sam, I'd add to that, which in more than 25 years of being agency side and seeing many clients, I've seen 2 people in wheelchairs. That's it. 2 people in wheelchairs in over 25 years, which is, not representative.
Yeah, no, it's such a good point. And I think, the universal design piece is really important, isn't it, in terms of just looking through that lens, because obviously we're focusing very much on physical disability, but broadening it out to neurodiversity, etc. There's lots of non-visible differences, and we touched on this in our pre-call, Giles, around making sure that obviously it's a kind of lower arousal setting for the people who've got much more sensory sensitivities, if that's the right word. I think it's a huge topic, and actually every office could probably do with that kind of bottom-up scan, really. Can you tell us a bit more about that? Because I know it was just really interesting when you're talking about some of those modern lifts, for example, that have got the touch screens that is suddenly not accessible. That'd be really helpful just to hear your view on that.
Just stepping back to that previous point, in terms of things like sensory overload, really important in terms of when people come back from a relatively quiet home environment to work in a busy open office environment, they may suddenly experience sensory overload, and you may want to design in a quiet space for people to go and maybe have a time to chill out or time to focus on work. And actually, one of the Harvard Business Review articles, actually probably about 2016, it's probably before its time, talked about vocal privacy. Again, kind of working from home, you can have these kind of sometimes quite difficult conversations with people because you're in a private environment, but actually when you go back into the office, it's not always kind of meaningful to have a confidential conversation when someone is sitting right next to you thinking, actually, are they listening in? But going back to what you said about the interfaces, so for example, when we have touch screens, for example, for meeting rooms, for lifts, for wayfinders, making sure that they are accessible. And actually touch screens are quite tricky in terms of visual impairment or people who are blind, and making sure that when you're designing in, as Sam was talking about, kind of that inclusive design piece, getting those kind of employee resource groups involved, when consulted when you're designing those services, try and get them to kind of think about how would they use it, how would they feedback about their user experience. I think that's really, really important to get that consultative element designed into the process, rather than saying, here's a service, can you go and test it now? Or we can only make some small tweaks at the end. So trying to build that kind of consultation in all the way through that process, really important.
Yeah, that's such a good point. And obviously, going back to the roots of All In and why we've done this work in the first place, it was about creating, with the idea that with the most inclusive and representative workforce, the work that we create will better represent the society we serve in advertising. So that's kind of like the root of it. And I'm really interested in the work that you and Sam have been doing, Giles, on the kind of broader industry piece on, more inclusive teams, not just behind the screen, but in front of the screen, etc. Can you just both touch on that a little bit more? It's just really interesting the way where that work's going. I don't know who wants to go
Do you
first.
want to do my intro, Giles? Seeing as this is my third time. Giles and I've been on a couple of other meetings yesterday where I kind of had to do a similar introduction, and I feel like I've got it down now. So yeah, Giles and I are part of a group called the TV Access Project, which is made up of the broadcasters disabled-led interest groups from across the television industry. It created after Jack Thorne's Edinburgh Television Festival McTaggart speech, which was last August, so August of 21. And after that, all the broadcast team has got to really urgent issue. The speech that he made shone a really urgent spotlight of representation of disabled people, but also the shocking barriers and lack of access that's in the industry. And so we all came together and started to create some work streams. One of them is looking at the activities, that is looking at the ability of production. So that's the work stream that Giles and I are part of. And as part of that work stream, there are a number of subgroups to embed accessibility but also representation in production. So as part of that, the 5 A's was created by the excellent Ali Castle, who works at Channel 4, which sets out a set of guidelines that production teams can use, thinking about I should remember these off by heart, and I'm not going to because it's very early and I've only had one coffee. But the adjustments, access, and 3 others.
Yeah, 3 other
but
A's.
basically, we can share those if that's useful. Yeah, I can share them around. And the other, we're also looking at access to work and how we can make that relevant and useful to the industry, because currently there are a lot of challenges for disabled people, and how we can make productions fund accessibility as well. So thinking about how we encourage producers to be thinking about making their productions accessible and how that is paid for, so that there is a line in the budget, so that it encourages everybody to be thinking about accessibility. So, and I hope kind of in the next 12 months, this will really start kickstarting some quite long-lasting change. Have I missed anything, Giles?
I would just compliment that, actually. So I think the work we're doing to try and, as Sam said, to try and get freelancers into productions in the most effective and efficient way is really, really important. The other thing that Channel 4 have done is launched a disability code of portrayal, which I think is kind of also recognised in industry, about trying to get authentic representation in programming. And we've recently used that to look at how we're doing. So you may have seen on my screen, we've got the purple light up on the 3rd of December. We're doing some idents for Channel 4, and we've used the disability code of portrayal to try and we kind of have a different lens on how we put the idents together. So we're looking at kind of we're having signing on the ident and actually representation of signers from the deaf community rather than BSL interpreters, to have different signers from different ethnic backgrounds. Actually increase the size of the signer, because it's not actually something we're retrofitting, we're actually designing into the content and make it part of the messaging, and to actually give people agency. And so we've actually consulted with the RNID to make sure that we've kind of removed any non-disabled bias in that particular field, and got feedback from them about how to approach this. So there's lots of kind of concepts and frameworks and principles that you can use when you're producing advertising. And I always think consume your content with no visuals, consume your content with no sound. Does it give the same message? Really, really interesting way of looking at with those 2 different lenses, and see if the message for your content in your advertising is the same. If it is, that's great. If it isn't, maybe have a look, see what you can do.
Yeah, that's really helpful. I mean, it's funny because I was judging Diversity in Advertising Channel 4 Award recently, and because it was, the focus was disability, visible and non-visibility, visible and non-visible, sorry. It was very interesting that all of them pitched with a very inclusive ad design, so it was fully accessible. And I was really struck by the fact that, you know, just only doing that for that because we're looking at disability for that year, if every ad was looked at through that lens. But I feel like there was progress towards that anyway, and then possibly in a year's time we'll be talking about how that works in practice, which is really exciting. But yeah, it was a fascinating day. In terms of, I know Kaylee was going to touch on this on the call, being, you know, in her role as HR, but in terms of the legalities of this, it's not just a nice to do for colleagues that have disabilities. It is actually a legal requirement. And it would just be really interesting to hear from each of you. Is your experience that that's being fulfilled where you work? And are there any challenges, barriers to delivering on that for companies?
Well, yeah, it's a legal requirement for us to meet the needs of our disabled colleagues. And actually, I think we all, I think people fail to understand that quite a lot. So that's part of our training, is informing people and reminding people that as part of the Equality Act, meeting reasonable adjustments for our colleagues is actually a legal requirement. If I'm being totally honest, the challenge that we are up against is that societally there is a lack of understanding and a lack of experience around disability and what that means. So that's why the training's required, and that's why we need to continue the conversation around this. But yeah, absolutely, I think there's always that challenge between kind of everybody wanting to do their best and then kind of challenging their own preconceptions and their own preconceptions of what is possible, what isn't possible, what they are willing and not willing to do, what feels fair and what doesn't feel fair. And actually part of my role is reminding everyone that this is a legal requirement and actually adjustments must be made. So yeah, I think, as I said, I think there is still a lot of work to do.
Yeah, that's the polite that's the polite answer on it. And I'm just really interested as well in, you know, obviously following the pandemic, the impact of that and the opportunity, I guess, for people with disabilities around hybrid working, more flexible working. Have any of you seen an improvement in terms of representation and an opportunity for disabled people because of that huge shift in our working patterns? Was it too early to see?
My view is, I think, and this is based on personal experience, I think it's prolonged my career, because the fact people now know you don't need to put a suit on or get dressed up, or you can work in your trackies from home, means I can do that for a lot longer than people probably thought I could. So I think it's glass half full. It's prolonged disabled people's careers because you don't have to go out the house to do a good job. Well, I hope it has anyway.
That's brilliant. Yeah, I mean, I just feel that, yeah, it just feels like there's a huge opportunity, particularly with the talent crisis. Yeah, kind of an immediate sort of solution to part of that anyway, is to look at a broader audience of people and attract you know, much broader group of people to the industry. So
Sharon, can I just jump?
Yeah, sorry, do Giles, please.
So jump in there. So we do work with some specialist recruitment agencies who kind of create a pipeline of disabled talent. I think if you are struggling in terms of attracting disabled talent, I think one is to look at your overall brand, everything you do in terms of how you kind of people see you, whether it be your advertising, your website, the communications you put out, your social media. Everybody's judging you in terms of your accessibility, inclusion, and what they see and what they hear. But also in terms of creating that pipeline of talent, there's a number of companies out there, even Break, MyPlus, a number of agencies that specialize in bringing disabled talent into your business. So if you are interested in that, then do contact those kind of companies and bring a kind of a great pipeline of disabled talent into your company.
That's super helpful. We might add all of those to our The All In Hub if we haven't got them in there already, Giles. We'll come back to you on that. That's great, because yeah, that's obviously what we're trying to do, is improve that supply chain, I guess, for people across all of the pillars that we're touching on with All In. Yeah, that's fantastic. Questions? Are there any questions from anyone on the call? I know a couple of people had to drop out. Danny, while we're waiting for people, do post them on the chat or just shout out if you want to. Can you talk about the Access to Work scheme, Danny? Because I know obviously that's part of All In, how that is the action. Trying to encourage companies to use that, promote it in their business. I
mean, my experience is, no one told me about it. There wasn't doctors. I didn't hear about it at all until I often find myself on the edge of a dance floor at parties, And I was on the edge of a dance floor next to a girl with cerebral palsy. We're talking about going to work, and she goes, "Do you get access to work?" I go, "No, I pay Ubers." Anyway, cut long story short, and I'll get a taxi to and from work, covered for by the government. But I had no idea about it, and I felt like it's really invisible. But you know, they basically paid for me to go to work. I pay the price of a tube fare, and they cover the cost of a taxi, which, you know, is brilliant. But you know, no one told me about it. Or not no one told me about it. It's not particularly public, which is awful. But it's a brilliant scheme.
Yeah, that's interesting. Even at point of diagnosis, there's just it's not given to you in a kind of package of
No, and
here's your support.
all the MS forums, or you know, but it was the edge of a dance floor at a party with next to a girl with cerebral palsy who told me. Otherwise, I would never have known.
Wow. So that is something that employers can take on in terms of, you know, just adding to the support they can offer. All stuff, I guess. It could just be something that we're all aware of.
Yeah.
One thing I would.
Yeah, sorry.
So Sharon, the one thing I would say is that can be a significant wait to get an assessment. It can be up to 16 to 20 weeks for an initial assessment. So you may want to think about internal support until that assessment happens, or if someone's waiting to have an assessment before they start work, to make sure that their start date aligns with that.
And Giles, in my experience, they'll back pay you, if that's the right phrase. You know, so it might take a long time, but you keep your receipts, and then you can charge it.
Absolutely. So Access to Work provide the assessment and the funding for one-off piece of equipment and ongoing services such as transport, and if you have, for example, speech to text or for example, BSL interpreter, they will pay for that ongoing support as well.
That's really practical and very helpful. Thank you. Yeah, great question from Suzanne, who's our events director. So just have you been to any events recently, either online or, I guess you're asking in person, Suzanne, might be more helpful as we move towards more in-person events, but have been brilliant at providing accessible venues and just experience for people.
I chair the Disability Advisory Group at BAFTA, and BAFTA over the last few years have gone through quite a transformational change. In terms of they had their film, what they called their film review, which was really having a deep dive into the inclusion perspective of their film awards, and as part of that, they unpicked a lot of issues around disability representation that they have since worked on. Their building was refurbished and reopened earlier this year, and is now so accessible. It's actually quite impressive. And as part of their the transformation that they've made, the Film Awards have now been moved from the Albert Hall to the Royal Festival Hall, so that there will be a visible ramp for the Film Awards for the first time next year. But this year, the Television Awards, if anybody watched them on the BBC, had a visible ramp. The Film Awards this year also had a BSL interpreter on stage. And there was many other things put in place for those attending the awards that was embedded into the planning of the event. So from going from a place of feeling quite exclusionary, particularly if you think about what the Film Award, when you imagine what the Film Awards is, it's the Albert Hall with a red carpet going up a flight of stairs, to now what this will be. You know, I think from an access point of view, that is it's quite a shift. And the thing is, going back to that universal design idea that we were talking about, there may well not be any wheelchair users or those with mobility impairments who are nominated or win an award this year or next year, but those sitting at home who are filmmakers of the future will now watch the awards and go, oh, that I could go, that is a place for me, therefore I'm going to put myself in a place where I could win a BAFTA. So it's about thinking about the future. So I think from my point of view, that's been a real shift for them.
Yeah, that sounds game changing. Giles?
So just when we had an event last week, and we plugged the computers into the live PA system, so we actually got live subtitles on Teams completely for free. So it's a little trick you can use. So if you're planning an event and you want to have subtitles, use Teams and plug into the PA systems, and then you can have live subtitles for anybody who's in the room, or you can actually project it on the screen as well.
Brilliant, that's a great tip. Yeah, we do normally use Teams for meetings. Actually, it's just for these bigger ones that we go to Zoom. But I know we've got closed captioning on as an option for people on today's call. Listen, we're at time, which is just really frustrating because I've got other questions I wanted to ask you. But as ever, this is an evolving piece of work, conversation, etc. So we'd love, if you don't mind, have you back the next few months just to kind of pick up on where we leave off today. We'll follow up, as we always do, with a note just directing you to the action, just with more information about how to deliver that within your business. Just remains for me to say a huge thank you to Sam, Giles, Danny, to Dan as well for the data, because I know that it's just a huge amount of work, and we're still sort of digging into it actually a year and a half on. But we are doing the census again on March the 15th next year. We'll be talking about that a bit more in a special event before that goes live. But yeah, thank you all again for joining. This will sit in our YouTube channel. I know we have lots and lots of people watching it on demand afterwards. So thank you all so much again, and thanks for joining us. Have a great
Thank you, Sharon, as well.
Thank
Take
you.
care.
Lovely
Thank
to see you.
Bye-bye.
Have a good day, everyone.